Welcome to Educami, and I'm Arpita. I wish you all a very happy new year. So, this is our first video of 2021, and in this video, we are going to discuss about the changing dynamics of India Nepal relations. Now, in the last few days, you must have come across reports about the political crisis in Nepal. Here we are going to look at the present political crisis, but the political issue in itself is not relevant for our examination, but we have to understand it within the broader perspective of India Nepal relations, and that's what we will attempt to do in today's video. Now, before moving to the present political crisis, I want to provide you with a brief timeline of the politics of Nepal from the 1990s onwards. Now, why from the 1990s? Because this was the period when multi party democracy is introduced in Nepal. Prior to that, also, Nepal had a prime minister from the 1950s itself, but most of the power was exercised by the monarch. So that is why the politics from 1990s is important for us to put the current crisis in perspective. So let's begin. 1990, as I told you, is the beginning of parliamentary democracy in Nepal, and 1991 is when the first parliamentary elections were held, and the Nepali Congress formed the first elected government. However, the beginning of parliamentary democracy did not bring about an end to the various problems that Nepal was facing. And between 92 to 96, the country was faced with economic crisis, failure of land reforms, and this resulted in a lot of discontentment among the people, leading to attacks on government property. In 1997, in this atmosphere of discontent, the Communist Party of Nepal adopted a revolutionary strategy to replace parliamentary monarchy with a new People's Democratic Republic. And this began a decade long civil war in Nepal, also called as the Maoist War, that was from 1996 to 2006. And during this period of the civil war, members of the royal family were killed, and also the popular support among the people towards the monarchy began to wane during this period. Now, in 2005, the King Gyanendra, dismissed the entire government and assumed full executive power. And in 2006, you have strikes and protests that forced the king to reinstate the parliament, and a comprehensive peace deal was signed between the Nepalese government and the Maoist. And what happened here was a seven party coalition was formed that resumed control of the government from the monarch, and the king was deprived of most of his powers. And within the seven party coalition also included the Maoist leaders who were involved in the civil war. So the coalition agreed to abolish the monarchy in Nepal and declare Nepal as a federal republic. So, many a times in your internal security section of GS, you're asked questions about the insurgencies in India and you're expected to provide some solutions. So, Nepal has actually been a very important case study in this respect, where leaders who were involved in the civil war were made a part of the political mainstream and given an opportunity to contest elections. So, this is an important case study that you can cite as a way forward in your answers related to insurgency. One thing to remember about the 2006 Comprehensive Peace Deal is that India is believed to have played an important part in the negotiations that took place. Now, post the peace deal from 2008 onwards, Nepal has been in the process of drafting a new constitution. And this has become another bone of contention in the internal politics of Nepal. Now, if you look at Nepalese politics, then the national political parties are dominated by the Hill Brahmins, followed by the Chetri and the Newar groups. So basically, what is said is that the politics in the country is dominated by the hill people, the Pahadis, the people who are residing in the hilly regions of Nepal. And then there are other sections of people who reside in the Tarai region, that includes the Tharu and the Madheshi groups. And it is said that the concerns of these groups are not being addressed by the present constitution. And these mainstream political parties have failed to bring about the agitating groups like the Madheshis into the framework of inclusive governance. If you look at the map here, the Terai region is marked in yellow, and this is where the Madheshi groups live. The claims of the Madheshis focus on several issues, including the boundaries of the present provinces and the provision of citizenship for the family members. Now, as I told you, that the purpose of today's video is also to look at the dynamics of the relation between India and Nepal. So, this has been a bone of contention between India and Nepal because Nepal views the demands of the Madheshi groups as being instigated by India. And in 2015, just a few months after Nepal was hit by a devastating earthquake, there was an economic blockade led by the Madheshi groups that stalled the petroleum and essential supplies from India. Some of the demands of the Madheshis, like the creation of two states along the Terai region, are seen as being done at India's behest. Now that we have a background about the political situation of Nepal since the 90s and about the new constitution, let us try and understand the present political crisis. The government in Nepal of the Nepal Communist Party is currently led by Prime Minister KP Oli, and this government came to power in 2018. Now, the Nepal Communist Party was formed 3 years ago when the various factions of the communist parties had come together to form a single grand Nepal Communist Party. Two of the factions that you have to keep in mind was the Nepal Communist Party led by Prachanda and the Communist Party of Nepal led by KP Oli. When the parties were merged, the agreement between the two leaders, Oli and Prachanda, was that they will take turns to lead the government. KP Oli has not kept his side of the bargain, sowing the seeds for separation. Another thing that happened was that the Prime Minister has now decided to dissolve the parliament and call for fresh election. And this decision of the Prime Minister has been approved by the President. Now, under the new constitution of Nepal, a Prime Minister enjoys a guaranteed 2 year period during which a no confidence motion is not permitted. And this period for KP Oli ended in February. Another issue here is that the dissolution was brought about just prior to a standing committee meeting that was expected to probe into corruption charges leveled against the Prime Minister. So, in all this situation of internal rivalry within the Communist Party, there are also protests going on in Nepal that are demanding the rejection of the present constitution altogether. And you must have read in the newspapers that China is taking a step towards resolving the crisis within the Communist Party and has sent a delegation to Nepal. So, this is what the present crisis is all about. So, unlike China, India has refrained from taking a strong stand over the internal political conflict in Nepal. And one of the reasons for India to maintain a distance over this current issue is that there have been some mistrust in India Nepal relations over the last few years. So now we are going to move on to examining some of the recent glitches in Indo Nepal relations. This begins in 2018 when Nepal refused to attend a multilateral BIMSTEC counter-terrorism exercise that was hosted by India. The reason being that Nepal views the BIMSTEC as an anti-China alliance headed by India. Another issue, which is much more contemporary, and I'm sure you all remember it, is over the new political map that was released by India, and the controversy was over the regions of Lipulekh, Kalapani, and Limpiadhura. Now, it's not that India included these areas in its map for the first time. They have always been a part of India's political map. However, this turned into a controversy in Nepal and actually became a very popular issue in Nepal. And the hashtag Back off India began trending on social media. The map controversy was further aggravated in May 2020 when Indian Defence Minister virtually inaugurated a new 80-kilometer long road at the Lipu Lake Pass. The Nepali government protested that the road passes through Nepal's territory and the Indian government had changed the status quo without diplomatic consultations. So, in retaliation, in June 2020, Nepal's parliament voted on a constitutional amendment bill to update their own country's map that showed the regions of Lipulekh, Kalapani, and Limpiadhura as belonging to Nepal. We have looked at some of the recent roadblocks in Indo Nepal relations. Now, the next question that can be asked is why is Nepal's foreign policy becoming increasingly politicized? First is due to the internal political crisis in Nepal and the challenges brought about by COVID. Issues like the road inauguration by India or the political map provided an opportunity to swiftly mobilize public opinion and play up the nationalist sentiments against India. Another reason is that anti-India sentiments has been on the rise among the younger population in Nepal after the economic blockade of 2015 over the rights of the Madheshis. Another reason is that Nepal's government is also taking a forward looking approach in its own foreign policy, which is not directly related to India. And the foreign minister of Nepal participated in the fourth Indian Ocean Conference in Maldives in 2019. Nepal is also looking to become a critical connectivity hub between China, South Asia, and the Indian Ocean region. Let us look at China's role in Nepal. China often uses India's neighbors as proxies to increase its dominance in South Asia. We see this with Pakistan as well. And we have to keep in mind that our neighborhood is surrounded by what are described as young democracies. Now, in countries like Nepal, political institutions are still in the process of transition. And in this transition phase, Beijing's authoritarian system has an appeal among India's neighbors that tends to undermine the process of democratization in these countries. Another reason is that, if you remember, I told you that during the 2006 Comprehensive Peace Deal, India played an important role in bringing together the seven-party coalition reach an agreement. Since then, China has been taking an active interest to play the role of a mediator in the domestic politics of Nepal. Moreover, there are several memorandums of understanding that have been signed between China and Nepal on a range of issues, particularly related to infrastructure. One example is the China and Nepal agreeing to collaborate in the energy sector and They have set an objective for the Nepal government to produce 15,000 megawatts of power in the next 10 years. We looked at some of the issues in Indo Nepal relations in the last few years, and we also saw the growing influence of Beijing in Nepal. Does that mean that India is no longer relevant for Nepal? Well, that is not the case. India will continue to matter for Nepal, and we will see the reasons as to why. There have been periods of strong bilateral relationship between India and Nepal, and these have been marked by discussions on mutual concerns. Nepal consulted with India before signing the Belt and Road Initiative. Moreover, Nepal's political leadership has to keep in mind that China's grand infrastructure projects in host countries have often increased the debt of these countries, and Beijing used the financial clout into political leverage. In the previous video on Indo Pacific, I told you about the Hambantota port that Sri Lanka has recently leased to China for 99 years as part of a debt equity swap. Also, in case of any major dispute coming up between India and Nepal, China will look at the cost of jeopardizing relations with India to the benefit of supporting Nepal. India actually has some genuine concerns about the need for deeper socio political reform and decentralization to avoid a protracted conflict in the Terai lowlands. Moreover, the Terai lowlands are in the bordering areas, so any conflict here is going to have an impact on India as well. So, India has some genuine concerns over the Madheshi issue that has to be addressed by Nepal's political structure. Based on our discussion so far, it is clear that India needs a new approach in the bilateral relations with Nepal. India cannot continue to look at Nepal through the 19th century colonial prism as a buffer state with limited sovereignty. Moreover, we have to keep in mind that China has long been part of Kathmandu's international relations. Nepal's foreign policy since the 1950s has involved balancing its ties between China and India. In fact, in 1956, Nepalese Prime Minister visited China to sign the China Nepal General Friendship Agreement that recognized China's sovereignty over Tibet. India has to also distance itself from any attempts at influencing Nepal's internal politics. Scholars of international relations have further argued that the terms of the 1950 Treaty of Peace and Friendship have become rhetorical, and it is time to negotiate a new set of mutually satisfactory agreements. So, what should be the new focus areas in India Nepal relations? First is, of course, connectivity. Second is, India needs a proactive approach in delivering projects related to infrastructure, hydropower, and military modernization. We can also take a page from the Gujarat Doctrine, which had emphasized that India needs to provide non reciprocal, unilateral, and preferential benefits to its smaller neighbors. Lastly, India has to keep in mind that political leaders in Nepal use anti India sentiments as a means to mobilize electoral support, and this usually does not change much of the things on ground. Now that we have come to the end of today's discussion, let's quickly revise the things that we discussed. We began with looking at Nepal's politics since the 1990s, which marked the beginning of multi party democracy in Nepal. Then we also discussed about the decade long civil war from 1996 to 2006. Then we discussed the reasons as to why the present political crisis in Nepal has happened, and that Prime Minister KP Oli has dissolved the parliament and called for fresh elections. We also saw the recent problems in India Nepal relations, especially the controversy over the political map. We discussed that politicization of foreign policy is a means to deflect attention from the internal problems of Nepal. Further on, we discussed about China's influence in Nepal and why India will continue to matter for Nepal. Then we saw the need to move away from a colonial perspective of approaching our relations with Nepal. And lastly, we discussed what needs to be the focus areas in Indo Nepal relations. I have included two practice questions for you here. The first question is: constitutional crises in India's neighborhood will impact India's neighborhood first policy. Critically examine. Now, this question will be difficult to answer if you don't know about the contemporary issues in South Asia. Here, I have given you the example of Nepal. You can also include the example of Sri Lanka and write a good answer for this question. The second question is: discuss the factors that have led to mistrust in India Nepal relations despite cordial relations at the cultural level. This question I'm sure you can easily answer based on today's discussion. So, after watching the video, if you try to answer these two questions, your notes will be really well organized and will help you in your revision. That's all for today. Thank you for watching the video and please share your feedback and suggestions with us.